Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Rhonda Borowski, the host of the Feeling Good podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we have the second in our series of the discussion with Dr. David Burns about the 4 deaths of the ego, or the 4 deaths of the self. And Dr. David Burns is the creator of the new team therapy. He's the author of the best-selling books, can I start over?
No, you're doing fine. Just carry on.
Okay, the
We don't have to
best-selling
be perfect.
self-help books, Feeling Good and Feeling Great. And Dr. Burns is also an emeritus professor, an adjunct in the Department of Psychiatry, School of Medicine at Stanford University. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you, Rhonda. And I'm really excited about today's talk, which is on anxiety. I wrote a book on anxiety called When Panic Attacks. My daughter was the editor, actually, and it's on not just on panic disorder, but all, phobias and OCD and every conceivable kind of anxiety. And when I was writing that book, I began to notice that I had 11 anxiety disorders myself. Like, for example, when I was little, I had a blood phobia, intense fear of heights, bees, dogs, horses, vomiting, just, on and on and on. And then after the book was published, I remembered 6 or 7 additional anxiety disorders that I'd completely forgotten about, like intense public speaking anxiety. I used to have an intense fear of cameras. I never could have done this in front of a camera. I just would get angry and tighten up in front of cameras. And so I think that's why I love treating anxiety so much, because whatever you've got, I can say, hey, I know how much that sucks. And because I've had that myself, and I can show you the way out of the woods, and what a joy it's going to be to show you how to get rid of your anxiety and get confidence and liberation. And then I'll tell you about one of my phobias today. But one of the most powerful treatments for anxiety goes back again 2,500 years to the time of Buddha and the Buddhist traditions ever since. And in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, there's a kind of interesting legend about what happens to you after you die. And and when you die, you'll suddenly wake up in a very dark place, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And out of the darkness, this horrible monster will suddenly emerge. And the monster represents all of the fears that you've had through all of your reincarnations. And for everyone, it's a little bit different. But the monster is absolutely terrifying. And you have a choice. You can run and try to get away from the monster, or you can stay and surrender to this monster. Well, virtually everyone obviously runs and tries to get away. And if you try to get away, you will get away, but then you'll find yourself in another dark place. And out of the darkness, a second monster will suddenly appear. And this monster is also terrifying beyond your wildest imagination, but just slightly less horrible than the first. And you have the same choice: stay and surrender, or run and try to get away. And of course, everybody runs and tries to get away. And this will go on over and over again, depending on the month in which you died. Now, if you die in January, there's 31 days in January, so 31 monsters will appear, each one less horrible than the one before. And if you escape from all of them, run away from all of them, you'll be reincarnated as something really lowly, like a worm. Or even worse, maybe like a psychologist in the era of managed care, with all of those regulations and paperwork making your life kind of miserable. Now, had you surrendered to one of those monsters, you get reincarnated at a higher station in life. And if by chance you had surrendered to the first and most horrible monster of all, two things would happen. First of all, you'd make the amazing discovery that the monster has no teeth. It was a fraud. It was like a hot air balloon. And you'd go into a state of uncontrollable laughter because you'd realize that all of your fears throughout all of your lifetimes were just based on a gigantic cosmic hoax. In addition, you'll achieve like enlightenment or uh, go into some other state. So you don't, I don't know if it's not karma, but it's I can't remember, some other mystical word. You probably know, Rhonda, uh, but at any rate, you don't have to go through the life death cycle anymore. You go into a kind of Buddhist heaven. And that's exactly what happens in the treatment of anxiety. That one of the most powerful tools, although everyone runs away from their fears, is to stay and confront the monster you fear and find out that the monster has no teeth. Now, one of my fears, among many, like probably 24 fears that I've had, it was the fear of blood. And I don't know where I got it, but I know even when I was little, I used to have this fear of blood. And I never should have gone to medical school because I was turned off by biology and stuff like that. But after when I was my senior year at Amherst, one of my advisors said that I should go to medical school rather than psychology graduate school. I was planning to go into psychology. He says, no, it's much better to go to medical school and be a psychiatrist. And I said, but I'm not a pre-medical student. I couldn't get into medical school. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. They won't even notice. You can kind of talk your way into anything. So I actually talked my way into the Stanford Medical School, but I'm certain I was one of the worst students they ever had. And I cut classes. I hated being there. I didn't have anything in common with the other students for the most part. And I remember one day when we went to a lab and they handed out needles and those rubber things that you put around the arm when you have a blood test. And they said, today, you folks are going to practice taking blood out of each other's arms. And I walked right out of the class and walked into the dean's office in the courtyard and said, I don't want to be in medical school. I never should have come. I'm dropping out of medical school. And he said, well, David, that's too bad, but I tell you, I could just give you a year's leave of absence, and then if you change your mind, you could come back in a year. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And so I took a year off and then came back, but then at my senior year, I did not want to go on and do an internship and get involved in emergency rooms and blood and stuff like that. And I said, I'm done with this MD stuff. But my current wife and I, we were kind of hippies, and we ended up homeless down around Carmel Valley, California. And we would just sleep on people's living rooms at night. They'd say you can sleep on the floor of our living room. And we were about to have a baby, and I got to thinking, well, if I just went back and did my internship and residency, because I really always just wanted to treat people. That's all I wanted to do, psychotherapy. And I said, people would think I know something, even though I would know I didn't really know anything, but they would pay me to talk to me, and it'd be so much easier than, being homeless. And um, because when we were homeless, I used to treat people all the time for free, like in coffee houses or beaches, but no one took me seriously because it was free and I didn't have any license or anything like that. So I went back a month early. I got a spot at Highland Hospital. They had an opening there at the last minute. They couldn't fill one of their internship slots. And so they would take anybody, I guess. So they took me. And I went a month early, and I told the director of the emergency room, I said, I'm going to have to be an intern here. And I was one of the worst medical students that Stanford ever had. And I don't even know how to use a stethoscope or anything, much less be an emergency room doctor. And I was wondering if I could maybe, volunteer and work here and see if I could learn a little something in the next month so I could, do my internship. And he says, don't worry, we'll make a doctor out of you. And I'm going to put you on, you're going to work 7 days a week, 12 hours on and 12 hours off. and you're going to learn a tremendous amount. And the first day I was in there, I was terrified. I felt like I was floating across the ceiling. I was so anxious, and I was just afraid I was going to have to deal with some bloody thing. But at first, wasn't anything bloody. There were men in delirium tremens and various things like that that weren't upsetting or threatening. And then I heard the sirens coming. I said, "Oh no, this doesn't sound good." And all of a sudden, there were police officers and paramedics pushing this man on a gurney, running, not walking, but pushing him at high speed down the hall toward our major trauma room. And when they pushed past where I could see, he was covered with blood. And I thought, "Oh no, this is not the thing that I want to see or deal with." And they put him in the major trauma room, and one of the nurses grabbed my gown and says, "Come on, you've got to help us." And she dragged me over to the door to where I looked in, and he was surrounded by maybe 8 doctors that were working on him and nurses simultaneously. And I said, what happened? And she said, "Well, he was a bomber, and he was planning to blow up City Hall. And his bomb blew up in the basement when he was working on it, and he's still alive. We're going to try to save his life, and we need your help." And I said, "Well, gosh, I don't have a lot of expertise in this. What exactly did you want me to do?" And she handed me a toothbrush, and she said, "Here, you get busy with this." And I said, "You want me to brush the guy's teeth? Does he have like horrible breath or something?" I mean, I said, "This doesn't make sense." And then she pulled me right up next to the body, where I guess he was alive, the man, and and said, look at his bloody tissue there." And I mean, it was all just bloody from his face, all the way down. And I saw they'd put huge needles into his arms and into his legs, and they were squeezing fluids in with blood pressure cuffs to keep him from going into shock. And it was just all my worst fears. And she said, "Look at his bloody tissue. You see those black dots? That's gunpowder, and that's going to poison him to death. So somebody's got to get all that gunpowder out of his tissue, and so you're the one who's going to do that." And so I had to put my hands in this bloody tissue and start scraping this gunpowder out of his tissue. Fortunately, he was unconscious. He was in a coma. The pain would have been excruciating for him beyond imagination. But I was in 100 state, 0 to 100. My panic was 100, but I couldn't avoid it any longer. I couldn't say, "Oh, tomorrow will be a better day. I'll come and clean the gunpowder tomorrow," because there were tremendous social pressures. And I started cleaning it like this. And after about 20 minutes, I was still 100% panic, unbearable. But then I had the thought, my gosh, uh, these doctors and nurses here at Highland Hospital, this is just a county hospital, but these people are fantastic. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're going to save this man's life. And I'm a tiny little part of that medical team. And in this month, I'm going to learn to become a real doctor. And it was like a lightning bolt hit me, and my anxiety went from 100 to 0, just like that. And I became euphoric. And I can tell you that that was one of the greatest months of my life. And the thing that I had feared so much became a great source of joy, or just tremendous satisfaction. And if I hadn't already had absolute definite plans to become a psychiatrist, I think I would have become a trauma surgeon or something of that nature. And so that's the first or the second great death of the self, the death of the fearful self, where you surrender to the thing that you fear the most. You stop avoiding it. You see, I had avoided it my whole life because I had no motivation to confront my fear of blood up until that point. But then I had a super good reason to overcome my fear of blood so I could become a real doctor and then become a psychiatrist, a career that has been more than a dream come true. And so that's the death of the fearful self, and using exposure, a technique that's at least 2,500 years old, but it requires tremendous courage on the part of the patient and the therapist as well. And I would say that exposure usually by itself isn't a complete treatment for anxiety. It's just one tool in your toolkit. And I have developed, 10, 20, 30 techniques or more for the treatment of all of the anxiety disorders. Treatments designed to bring about rapid and complete recovery. And it's not just to become less anxious, but it's to develop mastery and joy over the thing that you used to fear so much. It takes courage, but the great rebirth is fantastic and totally worth it. So I've hoped you enjoyed this one, and we'll see if Rhonda has one of her cool questions. Thank you.
David, what if the patient or your friend or even the therapist, what if they're too afraid? What if they don't have the courage to face their fear? What if their fear is something that they believe they're going to die from? Like, what if you say, you have to face your fear, and the patient says, well, I really don't want to. What do you do
Yeah.
then?
Well, I believe in free will and accountability. And as you know, one of the things we do in what's called team therapy is reduce the patient's outcome resistance and process resistance. And process resistance means maybe the patient doesn't want to do the thing that they're going to have to do to overcome their fear or to overcome depression. The thing that they have to do to overcome anxiety is to use exposure. And the thing they have to do to overcome depression is psychotherapy homework. And no one wants to do psychotherapy homework, and no one wants to face their fear. But the way I would say to a patient would be, let's say they have social anxiety or something like that, and I want them to talk to people in public and ask for dates and smile and say hello to strangers and do things that they're terrified of doing. I might say to them, you have social anxiety, and that's one of the many fears that I've had. And I would just love to show you how to overcome that. And believe me, I've got all kinds of tools to help you overcome your shyness or your public speaking anxiety, whatever it happens to be. And most of the tools I've developed, you're just going to love. They're really fun. The hidden emotion technique, the daily mood log, identify the distortions, things like that. But one of the tools that I'm going to use, you're going to absolutely hate, and that's facing your fears. And I'm going to ask you to go out and talk to strangers, say hello and smile to people you don't even know. I might even ask you to do something foolish in public to get over your fear of looking foolish in public. And I'll go with you. I'll do these things with you. I'll be with you every step of the way. Now, if you do that, if you're willing to use the exposure techniques, it'll be almost impossible for us to fail. Or your success is virtually guaranteed. However, if you are unwilling to use the exposure techniques, I'm not the therapist you're looking for, because I don't know how to cure anyone of any form of anxiety without exposure. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to get rid of you. I hope you'll stick with me, and we can face that fear together. But if you just want someone maybe to talk about your childhood or something like that, I'm not the guy you're looking for. And so when I set it up like that, most of the time patients want to stick with me. They do stick with me, and they recover, and usually really rapidly. Um, but we also sit with open hands, and if what I'm offering isn't something the patient is looking for, I just say, there's many therapists in the community who don't, like you, believe in the value of exposure, And psychiatrists, psychologists, they'd all love to have you as a patient, and go and explore that if you like. And if you ever change your mind, my door is always open to you. Give me a call and come on back, and we'll pick right up where we left off. And that's how I handle that.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed today's discussion on the death of the fearful self and its relationship to recovery from anxiety. And I hope you enjoyed listening to Dr. Burns' very inspiring story about how he overcame his own anxiety and his own fear of blood. Please join us next week from wherever you're tuning in now for the third in our series.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Thank you.